Welcome to HR Studio Podcast. Through bi-weekly interviews with HR executives, thought leaders, authors, speakers, and trend spotters from the world of HR and beyond, we invite you to listen, learn, and leverage. Welcome to HR Studio Podcast, building the next generation of HR leaders. HR Studio Podcast is brought to you by A.J. O'Connor Associates, a trusted human capital consulting partner to emerging, mid-market, and world-class organizations. To learn more, visit us at ajoconnor.com.
Welcome, everyone, to HR Studio Podcast. I'm your host, Denise Yosefat, for today's episode. Over the next 25 minutes, we're going to explore the topic of learning digital transformation in a company, and specifically HR's role in this transformation. Our expert for today's discussion is Tony Saldanha. Tony is the president of Transformant, a consulting firm specializing in assisting organizations through digital transformations. During his 27-year career at Procter Gamble, in which I got to work with him personally, so that's a great story, backstory there. Tony ran both operations and digital transformations for P&G's famed global business services and IT organization in every region of the world, ending up as Vice President of Global Business Services, Next Generation Services. He is an advisor to boards and CEOs on digital transformation, and a sought-after speaker. Tony is globally awarded, a globally awarded industry thought leader, and his new book is Why Digital Transformation Fail: The Surprising Disciplines of How to Take Off and Stay Ahead. And so I'm so excited to talk with you, Tony, and reconnect after, 20 plus years, at least 25 years.
Yes, you know how time flies, Denise. It's an absolute delight to be back here with you. It was 25 plus years all the way in Kobe, Japan, and wonderful to see you again.
Yes, yeah, and I know you know my husband as well, who was in the
Wally. Yes,
technology field, and so I'm looking forward to this. It's like a reunion.
It is. I've been really looking forward to this.
And it's a small digital world.
Yes.
All right, so let's dig right in. What does it mean to make digital transformations part of a company's living DNA?
Yes. So just to kind of back up a little bit, I know the term digital transformation can mean 100 different things to 100 people. And I say that number because I actually went out and talked to 100 different executives and got answers all the way from, oh, don't worry about it, it's just hype. We used to have digital watches in the 1970s, all the way through to, oh, it's the AI stuff that's going to take away all of our jobs. And so what I try to do in the book and in general is to put this in the context of industrial revolutions. So we're in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution. Unlike the first three, which were driven by machinery and electricity and the internet, this one, which is driven by digital technologies, is different because you basically have not a technology change, but every function, every process, every person going through a big transformation caused by a technology. In this case, it is digital. So what this means to every organization, every company, is that this isn't just about, hey, rip out one piece of technology and change it with something else, do an SAP project or, bring in some new machinery. It's about every person in the organization thinking differently. In the digital era, speed and agility are much, much more important than, hey, just pick one thing and do it right and do it over and over again. So that's what I mean by living DNA. Yes, we're going to have to swap out technology. We're going to have to change processes. But digital transformation becomes the living DNA of a company when every human being in the company thinks, acts, and performs differently.
And so tell me about some of those differences in the way they should think, act, and perform. What are some of those?
So I think the biggest ones are in, how people perceive change as almost like a given, and they're very, very open to change, versus thinking of change as a threat, right? So this, I would say, is the biggest difference between, for example, say a Netflix that's disrupted itself about 3 or 4 times, from mail and DVDs to streaming content, to original content, and now international programming, and all this within about 10 or 20 years.
Yeah.
Whereas other companies have been doing the same thing for quite literally 50, 100 years, in the oil and recently in the media and many other industries, right? So the first thing is how you think of change. The second thing is the agility by which you react, right? So we talked about how startups are 10 times faster than traditional companies, and that's one of the hallmarks of a more agile organization. The third difference, when it comes to being different or acting different, is then how there is the understanding and the partnership between human and machine, right? Human and technology. There have been a lot of things written up around, as I said, AI is coming for our jobs. AI, is just another tool. It's like the textile machinery of the first industrial revolution. It is going to affect jobs, but essentially, there will be new jobs created. But the combination of people plus machines, people plus AI, will be, the equivalent of people plus textile machinery in the first industrial revolution. So I think that the hallmark of this new organization is one that basically is not afraid of technology, that embraces it, and it partners people plus technology to take the company to the next level.
Mm. So for our HR learning leaders, what are the implications for them in terms of workforce and the way we hire, the way we develop people, the way we help people change? How can we help do that?
So I've been really looking forward to speaking with you on this podcast, Denise, because I believe that the digital transformation is actually a bigger opportunity for the HR community than it is for the IT community. And no, I'm not crazy, and I haven't been drinking early in the morning. I really strongly believe that this is true, because digital transformations are about 10% technology and about 90% transformation, change management, right? And I'm an IT professional, and I know how to do technology, and I know how to do change management with respect to technology. But in all of the work that I did in the recent years at Procter Gamble and now outside, I partner very closely with the HR organization to understand the context of the organization. Is the organization change resistant or change acceptant? Yeah. Is the change relatively near, or do we have time? Who are the thought leaders? What is the best change strategy? And therefore, I think for our HR leaders, you really have to understand and believe that you lead this, right? The technologies may differ, right? So fine, instead of machines, now you have digital. But your role in terms of owning how to transform the organization, the skills, the capabilities of the people, makes this one of the biggest opportunities of our lifetime.
Yeah, wow. So what are some of the things HR can do to prepare an organization and help organizations through the changes?
So there are three things. First and foremost, I think every organization, every company, every public sector needs to have a people strategy for the future, right? That includes, trying to predict and forecast where we're going to end up in terms of people capability. And then secondly, having a plan, including upskilling and bringing in new talent, and performance management so you actually get to the right profile, right? Just an anecdote on this one. I read recently that Amazon's going to spend $700 million to retrain their people. And it all, it kind of blew me because like, wait a minute, what are you guys talking about? You're the most technical company I know of, and you're going to be spending close to $250 million to retrain your people. But that's what I mean. I mean, companies need to understand that technology is not static, especially in an industrial revolution. You're going to have to train and retrain your people over and over again and reskill it. So that's one, right? Own the people strategy. The second thing is they need to partner with the CEO and the CIO and the digital officer to actually execute the change. So you're going to have people that used to work in the back office in accounting, moving things from paper to machines or PCs to mainframe or that kind of stuff, who in the future, maybe in 10 years, are possibly going to be writing algorithms that actually do all of the work, right? And I don't necessarily mean coding, C++, but one of those low code, no code things. Right. Move a little bit of code on the screen from here to there. And that's what I mean by writing algorithms, right? So every transformation project, whether it is creating a new digital product or changing or rewiring the way companies work, is going to have immense change. And the HR leaders need to be right there along with the CEO and the IT people to drive that. The third role that IT people, the HR leaders in the organization play is then actually in driving digital literacy both up and down in the organization. This is actually a little not so funny, but there is a McKinsey research that says only 20% of all the boards and CEOs of the company have enough digital literacy to be able to lead their companies effectively in the coming digital in the coming digital era. And again, as the learning officers of the company, HR leaders own that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because my husband, who is a CIO, had a reverse mentor because there's so much that the kids now learn out of college that he didn't know about and needed to know about in order to lead the organization.
Yes.
So do you see things like that? Do you see being creative in the way that people who have been with the company for years can learn and develop as well? What patterns do you see there that work?
There are several patterns, and again, I think Wally, who, by the way, many, as you know, but for your listeners, many years ago used to be my boss, who I admire and love a lot. He would be, of course, among the leading thinkers in this area. So reverse mentoring is absolutely a fantastic strategy. Another really important strategy is using your ecosystem of suppliers and, kind of tapping into startup companies and so on and so forth, because I think, on a day-to-day basis, we get so caught up with the work that we do that it's very hard to be diligent to kind of keep an eye on what's happening, not necessarily just in a conceptual research manner, but in an applied field area to see what is, the startup world doing on something as mundane as travel and expenses, right? Or on, having AI-driven purchases managers, right? So that's the kind of stuff where you have to tap into the startup ecosystem. And then I think the third thing is again, personally making the commitment to stay in touch, to catch up, to read. I force myself to read at least 5 articles every night before I go to sleep.
Wow.
Because, and they're just online stuff. So, it's nothing earth-shattering. But it's amazing. I mean, it makes a difference over a period of time.
Yeah. And I think that, the whole thing of lifelong learning has to come back into play because things get outdated so quickly that if you're not, making an intentional effort to learn, you can get outdated very quickly.
That is so true. And you and your listeners are experts in this area. But I came across a graph which is called Martek's law, that talks about how technology grows exponentially, but organization capability actually grows logarithmically, not even linearly, but logarithmically, which means it flattens over time. And so that gap between the organization and technology, just widens over time. And so unless you as an individual, unless the company, unless the HR leadership makes a concerted effort to kind of bring those two closer together, I think, over time, you really have a problem.
Yeah. I know I was working with a client the other day who said that a few individuals, as they're trying to put in systems to do metrics and some very basic things to some corporations, but new to them, that those individuals were lagging behind. And that just smacked to me as an example of what you're talking about in terms of, can they adapt? So what do we do with people who are harder to adapt?
Yeah, that is a really important question. Obviously, as we know, whenever there's a big exponential change, unfortunately, in addition to exponential winners, there's also exponential losers. So, but I think the role of us as leaders is to essentially give everybody a chance, and that's the most important thing that we can do as leaders. Some of the people will make it, some of them will not. But I think, initiatives such as what I was talking about, Amazon's effort to retrain its workforce. AT&T did something similar. A few years ago when they announced $1 billion set aside to retrain 100,000 employees. Loblaws, the Canadian retailer, has set aside $250 million. So, I think what you do is you start from the end point, which is to say, I think, and I know I'm going to be wrong, because anytime you predict, you're going to be wrong, but you're going to be closer to the truth than, if you did nothing, right? So what you say is, I think I'm going to need roughly these number of people, this capability. And then, you put together a plan that includes three things. And I've heard some companies follow a strategy which is called 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, which is, 1/3 of the organization. What you do is you basically try and counsel out, because they're never going to be able to make it, right? 1/3 of the organization, you try and basically retrain, because they need some remedial help, right? And then maybe 1/3 of the organization is in continuous learning, is going to be fine, right? And then you also try and bring in people from the outside, right? And so I think whether it's that strategy or something similar, you really need to have a plan.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about the bringing in people from the outside, and something that has been fairly, just over recent years, applicant tracking systems, and how we screen out people when we hire them. And, the good news is it helps us find qualified candidates. The bad news is sometimes it screens out people who might fit in great with the culture, who might be easy to adapt, but just may not have the skills that match the tracking system. So are we losing good candidates? So how do we balance those in our digital world when we're looking for new people?
Yeah, and that is actually one of the big things that is a challenge on digital literacy in the company. I've been associated with MIT's Future of the Work task force, and one of the things we looked at was, how do you recruit the right profile? Because what most companies do is that they, especially when it comes to behavioral interviews, is use past profiles of what's made the company successful to hire future people, and that may not necessarily be what works for the future. Yeah. So I think the couple of things that I believe need to happen is, one, that you need to have a combination of whatever works. So, whatever behavioral interview process works, but then you have to add on top of that 2 specific skill sets. One, the ability to take risks and thrive in change, right? And I think the other one is the ability to work across ecosystems and collaboratively with others, right? Because in reality, what these AT&T and Amazon and other stories tell you is that it is a lot cheaper to retrain at least, you know, as many people in your company as you can than to go hire new people, right? And so that ability to have the right raw material that you can retrain over time is really important.
Right. Attrition has a big cost to it.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, not retaining the right people and not getting the right people,
Yes.
in the first place has a big cost as well. Right. So tell me a little bit about culture and digital transformation and how, what should a company, how should a culture adapt in a company to allow for digital transformation? I heard risk taking. What else?
Um, Culture is arguably the difference between what I call stage 4 transformation and stage 5. So just to back up a little bit, because digital transformation has 100 different meanings to 100 people, what I've tried to do is provide a framework of 5 stages where stage 1 is just, more like automation. Stage 2 is siloed effort. So you might have some really transformative work happening in one subsidiary or one function, but it is, hasn't reached across the whole company. Stage 3 is, where there is a corporate mandate like GE had in the Jeff email, but the job isn't over. Stage 4 is when you have finished the job, but technically not on organization. And stage 5 is living DNA, where you've actually changed the organization's DNA, right? So back to a question of what does that mean? The culture of the organization is essentially what that living DNA is all about. And what that means is a culture that is extremely customer centric, almost like, when you look at every successful large Silicon Valley company, whether they are Zappos, the shoes retailer, or Apple or Amazon, the common denominator across all of these is that they are just laser focused on making their customers happy. And everybody else, including their stockholders, almost comes second, right? And that's a remarkable reframing of the whole financial system of Wall Street. Exactly, right? So that's one element, right? And how do you enable every person? So at Zappos, the call center person on the line, they have the ability to make financial decisions to make a customer whole if they think the customer has been treated unfairly by the company. Most other companies would have restrictions. Oh, no. You basically document what you think needs to happen and then go 3 levels up to get an approval on that, right? So that's an element of empower every person in the company, whether they are on the phone lines or in a manufacturing line, to do the right thing for the customer. Right? The second is the element of agility and risk taking. One of the things that I've learned about performance management systems in Silicon Valley versus other large companies is that other large companies still use the annual performance review and ratings and rankings and all of those types of systems. Whereas Silicon Valley has already moved to a quarterly objectives and key results, where it is much more quicker in terms of reviews. But it also says, it's okay if you set up stretch goals and only met 70% of those, because 70% of meeting stretch goals is much better than meeting 100% of sandbagging type goals, right?
Yeah.
And Google's analytics has demonstrated that. And in fact, at Google, if you exceed your plans for 2 quarters in a row, you're labeled a sandbagger, and it's actually not good for your career, right?
Oh.
So think in terms of what that does in terms of sending a message about risk-taking and stretching to the organization, right? And that's an element of culture. The third element of culture is basically agility and speed, which is, time is your enemy. even if you think you're not perfectly there, get on with it. Just kind of get stuff done. And it is those cultural elements that makes an organization a stage 5 transformation engine.
Yeah. And sorry about the lights going out. That's our digital.
I figure, yes. Well, it's actually nice. I mean, you guys are doing something for the environment, so that's okay.
Something for the environment. I'm not sure it's helpful for the interview. But this has been absolutely fascinating, Tony. I could go on for ages talking about this, but I want to thank you. And one last quick question. Any way to get started for our HR leaders? What's the one thing you would say, here's how to get started, here's how to help your organization get started with digital transformation?
I think the first thing is essentially to work with your CEO, your leaders, and your technology organizations on putting together a digital literacy plan, right? That is really, really important. This isn't just training on, Word or Excel or analytics. It is really about understanding the effect of technology on every part of the organization, right? And then, the other thing I would say is that, honestly, just get started with technology experiments. I mean, my experience, especially in the last few years at Procter Gamble while I was there, has shown me that, what Silicon Valley startups do is they basically learn by doing experiments. And, if something doesn't work, they change, they kill it. And that's not necessarily the culture that we've established in large companies. And so I think, bringing some of that together would be a great start for our HR leaders.
Wonderful. So more strategic, less tactical, and really looking at the full picture of what that plan needs to be. Well, thank you.
Absolutely.
It was a real pleasure speaking to you today. Some great advice for our HR leaders on how to make a foray into this, transformation. I want to speak to our HR podcast listeners for a moment. If you are not a subscriber yet to HR Studio Podcast, you can become one by going to hrstudiopodcast.com. And you'll get notified about new episodes. And then also there, you'll find out about all our speakers, including Tony, their social handles and their contact information, show notes, and more about them, and about Tony's book, again, which is Why Digital Transformations Fail, The Surprising Disciplines of How to Take Off and Stay Ahead. And I'm also happy to offer one of our listeners a link to the Amazon Kindle version of Tony's book. So thank you again, Tony. It's been a remarkable and enlightening discussion with you this morning, and great to see you again.
Oh, absolutely, Denise. This has been so nice to be able to see you. I enjoyed speaking with you, and I wish you and your listeners all the very best.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the HR Studio podcast. To download complimentary resources from this week's episode and to catch up on past episodes, please visit hrstudiopodcast.com. Subscribe to the HR Studio podcast list and social channels while there to receive alerts and recaps on all our episodes. HR Studio Podcast is brought to you by A.J. O'Connor Associates. For over 35 years, AJO has built its reputation on experienced listening, exceptional quality, and caring partnerships, delivering in 30 states and 20 countries. To learn more and subscribe to AJO's Top 100 HR blog, visit us at ajoconnor.com.